I never thought I'd become invisible in my own son's house. At 68, after 2 years of living under Michael and Jessica's roof in Austin, Texas, I had perfected the art of disappearing into the wallpaper. Every morning at 6 a.m., Paul, I'd slip quietly from my small guest room to start breakfast before they woke up. Every evening, I'd have dinner ready when they returned from work, then retreat to my room while they enjoyed their family time. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and tell me which city you are watching us from. Now, let's continue with the story. My name is Dorothy Williams. Though I'd been Dorothy Mitchell for so long, I almost forgot who I used to be. 2 years ago, when Michael called me crying about their mounting credit card debt, $37,000 worth of mistakes and poor decisions, I didn't hesitate. I sold the house that Robert and I had called home for 22 years and handed them every penny. "Mom, you're saving our lives," Michael had said through tears. "We'll never forget this." Yet here I was, forgotten before the ink on the bank transfer had dried. "Dorothy, Tyler's backpack needs to be washed," Jessica announced one Tuesday morning, not looking up from her phone as she sipped the coffee I'd made. "And can you pick up my dry cleaning today?" "The ticket's on the counter," I nodded, as I always did. At 68, I'd become their live-in maid, nanny, and cook, all unpaid positions I'd somehow volunteered for by being generous with my life savings. Tyler, my 7-year-old grandson, was the only bright spot in this arrangement. He still hugged me with genuine affection and asked for my bedtime stories about his grandfather, Robert. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd raised 2 children as a single working mother after Robert's death, built a career in real estate, and managed to save enough for a comfortable retirement. Now I was dependent on my son's charity, grateful for a roof over my head in a house where I felt like an intruder. "Grandma Dorothy," Tyler whispered to me that morning as I walked him to school. "Why does Mommy always sound angry when she talks to you?" Out of the mouths of babes. "She's just stressed." "Sweetheart," I told him, though we both knew it was more than that. Jessica's resentment had been growing like mold in a damp basement. Slow, persistent, and toxic. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in my room, folding their laundry, another unspoken expectation, when my phone buzzed with a voice message in the family WhatsApp group. Without thinking, I pressed play, expecting to hear Michael's voice with some scheduling update. Instead, I heard Jessica's voice, crystal clear. "That old woman is a dead weight in my house. I can't stand having this leech eating our food and taking up our space anymore. If Mike didn't feel sorry for her, I would have kicked her out months ago." My hands trembled as I realized what had happened. Jessica had accidentally sent a voice message meant for her friends to our family group instead. The message was followed by silence. No one had responded yet, which meant Michael probably hadn't heard it. But I had. Every cruel word burned into my memory like a brand. For several minutes, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the phone. Leech, dead weight. These were the words my daughter-in-law used to describe the woman who had given up everything to save their financial lives, the woman who cooked their meals, cleaned their house, and cared for their child while they pursued their careers and social lives. I looked around the small guest room that had become my entire world. A twin bed with a quilt I'd brought from my old house, a small dresser where I kept my modest wardrobe, a single window that looked out onto their backyard, where Tyler's swing set stood as a reminder of happier family times. This was supposed to be temporary, they'd said, just until they got back on their feet. 2 years later, their feet seemed quite firmly planted. On my neck, I heard the front door slam. Jessica was home from her job at the marketing firm, probably expecting her usual routine, me greeting her with a warm smile, asking about her day, maybe offering a snack or a cup of tea. The woman she called a leech, being hospitable to her host. Instead, I stayed in my room and began to think, really think, for the first time in months. Who was I before I became Dorothy, the family charity case? I was Dorothy Williams, a real estate agent who had worked with some of the biggest investors in Texas. I was the woman who had raised 2 children alone after Robert died, who had somehow managed to save enough money to help them when they needed it most. And somewhere in my old life, there were things I'd forgotten about. Documents Robert had hidden away, investments he'd made in my name that I'd never fully understood, a trust fund he'd mentioned once, years ago, that I'd dismissed as one of his far-fetched financial schemes. Maybe it was time to remember who Dorothy Williams really was. The voice message still sat unplayed in the family group chat, waiting for Michael to discover it, waiting for the explosion that would inevitably come when he realized what his wife really thought about his mother. But I had a feeling that by the time he heard it, Dorothy the grateful guest would be gone, and Dorothy Williams, the woman I'd been before I became their convenient solution to domestic labor, would be making some very different arrangements. The next morning, I woke before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While Michael and Jessica slept, I drove my old Honda Civic to the one place that held the answers I needed, the storage unit where I'd hastily packed Robert's papers when I sold our house. Storage King on South Austin Highway looked exactly like every other storage facility in Texas. Endless rows of beige metal doors under fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. Unit 247 held the remnants of my former life: photo albums, Robert's golf clubs, boxes of Christmas decorations, and most importantly, his old desk with all the drawers I'd been too grief-stricken to sort through properly. I pulled out box after box, searching through Robert's meticulous filing system. He'd been an accountant by trade, obsessively organized in ways that used to drive me crazy. "Bobby, why do you need to keep every bank statement from 1987? I'd teased him. Now I was grateful for his compulsive record-keeping. The breakthrough came in a manila folder labeled DW Trust, confidential. Inside were documents that made my heart race. In 1995, Robert had established a trust fund in my name using inheritance money from his wealthy Aunt Margaret. The initial investment was $200,000, money I'd never known about. But what made my knees weak were the quarterly statements showing how that money had grown over nearly 30 years. $2.8 million. I read the number again, certain I was misunderstanding something. But there it was, in black and white, on letterhead from Merrill Lynch Wealth Management. The Dorothy Williams Trust, managed by a financial advisor named Thomas Sterling, had been quietly accumulating wealth for decades through diversified investments and compound interest. How had I never known about this? I frantically searched through more papers and found my answer in a letter Robert had written but never sent, dated just weeks before his heart attack. "My darling Dorothy, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone and you're probably panicking about money. Don't. The trust fund I set up in your name will ensure you never have to worry about anything. I never told you about it because I wanted you to live your life without the burden of wealth, to make decisions based on love and family rather than money, but now you'll need it. The lawyer's name is James Thompson. Call him. You're not the poor widow you think you are. You're one of the wealthiest women in Austin. I love you, Robert." My hands shook as I read his words. All this time, through the sleepless nights worrying about my future, through the humiliation of becoming dependent on my son, through 2 years of being treated like hired help, I'd had nearly $3 million sitting in an account I didn't even know existed. I called the number on the Merrill Lynch statement from my car in the storage facility parking lot. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached Thomas Sterling. "Mrs. Williams, my goodness. I was wondering when you'd contact me. I've been managing your trust for over 20 years. Your husband left very specific instructions that I wasn't to reach out unless there was an emergency. But I've been hoping to hear from you since his passing. Mr. Sterling, I need to understand something. Is this money? Is it really mine?" "Absolutely. Your husband was very clear about that. You're the sole beneficiary, and you have complete control over the funds. In fact, I've been reinvesting the quarterly dividends as instructed, which is why the balance has grown so substantially. Would you like to schedule a meeting to discuss your options?" 2 hours later, I sat in Thomas Sterling's downtown Austin office, trying to absorb the reality of my situation. The man across from me was about my age, with kind eyes and the patient manner of someone who'd spent decades helping people navigate financial complexities. "Your husband was remarkably prescient," he explained, spreading statements across his mahogany desk. "The trust was structured to protect you from taxes and provide maximum growth. You have liquid assets of approximately $2.8 million, plus additional investments in several Austin area properties that have appreciated significantly. Properties? Yes. Your husband purchased 3 small apartment buildings in East Austin back in the early 2000s, when that area was still affordable. They're now worth about $1.2 million combined and generate roughly $8,000 monthly in rental income that's been automatically reinvested. I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. I wasn't just wealthy, I was practically a real estate mogul, and I'd had no idea. While I'd been scrubbing Jessica's toilets and apologizing for taking up space in their guest room, I'd been earning more in passive income each month than most people made from their jobs. Mr. Spike Sterling, I need to ask you something, and please be honest. If I had known about this money 2 years ago, would I have needed to sell my house to help my son with his debts? He looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Williams, $37,000 represents about 1.3% of your total assets. You could have written that check without affecting your lifestyle at all. The room seemed to spin. I'd given up my independence, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth for a problem that represented pocket change compared to my actual financial situation. I'd been played, not maliciously by Robert, who thought he was protecting me, but certainly by circumstances and my own ignorance. There's something else you should know, Thomas continued gently. Your husband left a sealed letter with instructions that I should give it to you when you first contacted me. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. Inside was another letter. Dorothy, if Tom is giving you this letter, it means you've discovered the truth about our finances. I know you're probably angry with me for keeping this secret, and you have every right to be. But I've seen too many people change when they know they're wealthy. I wanted you to live authentically, to make genuine relationships, to know that people loved you for who you are, not what you have. Now you know the truth. You're not dependent on anyone. You never were. Use this knowledge wisely. Don't let anyone take advantage of your generous heart again. And remember, the best revenge is living well. I set up a meeting with my old friend, Margaret Thompson, next week. She can help you with whatever you decide to do next. Trust her. All my love, Robert P. S. The house in East Austin on Cedar Street. The one with the blue shutters that you always said was your dream house. I bought it in 1998. It's been a rental property, but the lease expires next month. Maybe it's time for you to come home. I sat in that office for another hour, learning about LLC structures, property management, and investment strategies. By the time I left, I had a clear picture of my actual situation. I wasn't Dorothy the charity case. I was Dorothy Williams, one of the most financially secure women in Austin, Texas. But more importantly, I was Dorothy Williams, and Dorothy Williams was nobody's fool. The drive back to Michael's house felt different. Instead of dreading another evening of being treated like the help, I found myself studying the neighborhood with new eyes, real estate values, property assessments, investment potential. The skills I'd developed as a real estate agent were still sharp, just dormant. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed things I'd been too downtrodden to see before. The house needed new gutters. The landscaping was overgrown and unprofessional. The fence was beginning to sag. For a couple supposedly getting back on their feet financially, they weren't taking very good care of their investment. Inside, Jessica was at the kitchen table with her laptop, probably shopping online again, a habit that had contributed to their original debt problem. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw something different in her expression. Was it guilt? Had she realized her voice message had gone to the family group instead of her friends? Oh, Dorothy, there you are. Where have you been all day? Taking care of some personal business, I said calmly. Is Tyler home from school? He's at soccer practice. Michael's picking him up. She paused, studying my face. Everything okay? You seem different. Yes, I supposed I was. This morning I'd been a woman dependent on her son's charity. Tonight I was a woman with options. More options than Jessica could possibly imagine. Everything's fine, dear, I said. And for the first time in 2 years, I meant it. Just fine. I went to my room and called Margaret Thompson, the friend Robert had mentioned. The phone rang 3 times before a warm, familiar voice answered. Dorothy Williams. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Bobby told me you might call someday. Within minutes, we'd arranged to meet the next morning. Margaret, it turned out, was now one of Austin's top attorneys specializing in estate planning and family law. She'd been waiting 25 years for this conversation. As I hung up the phone, I heard Jessica's voice from the kitchen, talking on the phone with someone. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's completely clueless about money. It's actually kind of sad how grateful she is for everything we do for her. I smiled for the first time in months. Clueless about money. If only she knew that the woman she considered a financial burden could buy and sell their house 3 times over without breaking a sweat. Tomorrow, Dorothy Williams was going to start making some very interesting decisions. Margaret Thompson's law office on West 6th Street exuded the kind of understated elegance that came with decades of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Austin, and the walls were lined with awards and photos of Margaret with various Texas politicians and business leaders. When she greeted me in her reception area, I barely recognized the sharp-dressed woman before me as the Margaret who used to join Robert and me for backyard barbecues in the 80s. "Dorothy Williams," she said, embracing me warmly. "Look at you. You look exactly the same, just a little more tired. Rough couple of years. You could say that." I followed her into her private office, where she gestured for me to sit in one of 2 leather chairs facing her desk. "Before we begin, I need you to know something," Margaret said, settling across from me. "Robert and I had many conversations about you over the years. He was worried about what would happen to you after he died. Not financially, obviously, but emotionally. He was afraid your generous nature would make you vulnerable to people who might take advantage." She paused, studying my face. Was he right to be concerned? The question hit me like a physical blow. I thought about the past 2 years, the countless meals I'd cooked and cleaned up alone, the laundry I'd folded, the errands I'd run, the way I'd been relegated to the background of my own family, the voice message that had shattered my illusions about my place in their lives. "Yes," I said quietly. "He was absolutely right." Margaret nodded grimly. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, I laid out the whole humiliating story. The frantic call from Michael about their debt, my decision to sell the house and give them every penny, the gradual slide from welcome guests to unpaid household staff, the voice message that had finally opened my eyes to how they really saw me. Margaret took notes throughout my story, occasionally asking pointed questions about dates, amounts, and specific incidents. When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Dorsey, what do you want to accomplish here? Because I need to be clear. You have several options, and they range from simply walking away to more comprehensive approaches." "What do you mean by comprehensive?" "Well, you could pack up and leave tomorrow, move into your own place, cut contact, live your life. That's the high road." She paused. "Or you could help your family learn some valuable lessons about gratitude, respect, and the consequences of taking people for granted. That's the education road." "The education road?" Margaret smiled, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the mischievous girl who used to help me plan surprise parties for Robert's birthday. "Dorothy, your family has treated you poorly because they believe you have no power, no options, no leverage. They see you as dependent and grateful. What if we adjusted their perspective?" Over the next 3 hours, Margaret and I crafted what she called a family education strategy. It was elegant, legal, and absolutely devastating in its thoroughness. First, we would establish my independence through strategic property acquisition. Margaret had done her research and identified several key properties that could give me significant leverage over my family's situation. "Your son works at Henderson Commercial Properties, correct?" Margaret asked, consulting her notes. "Yes, he's a property manager there. It's a good job. He manages several commercial buildings downtown, including the Morrison building on 4th Street where his office is located." I nodded, not sure where she was going with this. "The Morrison building is going up for sale next month. The current owner is retiring and moving to Florida. We could arrange for you to purchase it through an LLC. Complete anonymity. Your son would never know his new landlord is his mother." The idea was delicious. Michael, who had been treating me like a burden, would unknowingly be working for me. "But wouldn't that be expensive?" Margaret laughed. "Dorsey, the asking price is $1.8 million. You could pay cash and still have $1 million left over. Plus, It's already generating $45,000 monthly in rental income. It would actually be a smart investment. We spent another hour identifying additional strategic purchases. The apartment complex where Michael and Jessica rented out their spare room through Airbnb could be acquired through a different LLC. Several properties in their neighborhood were on the market, or soon would be. By the time we finished, I would own a substantial portion of their immediate world. Now, the second phase involves strategic withdrawal of support, Margaret continued. You've been providing approximately $2,000 monthly in free labor, cooking, cleaning, childcare. When you stop providing those services, they'll either have to do the work themselves or pay someone else to do it. But what about Tyler? I don't want him to suffer for his parents' behavior. Tyler won't suffer. In fact, this might be the best thing that could happen to him. He'll see his parents taking responsibility for their household instead of exploiting his grandmother. That's a valuable lesson. Margaret pulled out a calendar and began mapping out timelines. The property acquisitions will take 30-45 days to complete. During that time, you'll gradually reduce your household contributions, claim back problems, maybe some fatigue, force them to confront the reality of managing their own lives. What if they kick me out? They won't. They need your labor too much. And besides, you'll be paying for a housekeeper and a nanny as your contribution to the household. They'll be getting better service than you were providing, and you'll be demonstrating your financial capability. The third phase was the most delicate, strategic revelation of my financial situation. Rather than a dramatic confrontation, Margaret recommended a gradual unveiling that would maximize the psychological impact. We'll start with small indicators, she explained. New clothes, maybe a newer car. When they ask questions, you'll mention some old investments that have been doing well. Let their imaginations fill in the gaps. And then we wait for the right moment for full disclosure. My guess is it will come naturally. Probably when they try to exert control over you based on their assumption that you're financially dependent on them. By the end of our meeting, I had a comprehensive strategy that felt both just and proportionate. I wasn't trying to destroy my family. I was trying to educate them about respect, gratitude, and the true value of what they'd been taking for granted. Margaret walked me to the door of her office, carrying a folder thick with legal documents and property listings. Dorothy, I need to ask you one more question. Are you doing this for revenge, or are you doing this to save your family relationships? I considered the question carefully. Both, I think. I'm angry, and I want them to understand how they've treated me, but I also love them. And I want Tyler to grow up in a family that treats people with dignity. Good answer. Revenge alone would make you bitter. Love alone would make you a doormat. Together, they might actually accomplish something worthwhile. That evening, I returned to Michael's house with my first purchase, a $200 slow cooker from Williams-Sonoma. When Jessica saw the bag, she raised an eyebrow. Splurging on kitchen gadgets, Dorothy. Oh, just a little something to make cooking easier, I said casually. My back's been bothering me lately, and I thought this might help. It was a small lie, but a strategic one. The slow cooker was expensive enough to suggest I had discretionary income, but practical enough to seem like a reasonable purchase for someone managing household duties. Over the next few days, I began implementing Margaret's plan. I bought new clothes, not extravagant, but noticeably nicer than my usual thrift store finds. I upgraded my phone to the latest iPhone, mentioning casually that my old phone had been giving me trouble. Most importantly, I started setting boundaries. I'm afraid I won't be able to pick up your dry cleaning today. Jessica, I said on Thursday morning, I have an appointment with my doctor about this back problem. The appointment was real. I was seeing a financial advisor to discuss property management strategies, but Jessica didn't need to know that. Your back? Jessica looked annoyed. How long has this been going on? A few weeks now. Getting worse, unfortunately. I might need to cut back on some of the heavier housework. I watched Jessica's face as she processed this information. The woman who had called me a leech was suddenly confronted with the possibility that her free labor source might be drying up. Well, maybe you should see a specialist, she said reluctantly. We have good health insurance. You're covered under our family plan. That's very generous, but I have my own insurance, I said. Another small truce that hinted at larger financial resources. By the following week, I had submitted offers on 3 properties. The Morrison building where Michael worked, a small apartment complex in their neighborhood, and a duplex 2 blocks from their house. All purchases were being made through different LLCs that Margaret had established, with names generic enough to avoid suspicion. Austin Holdings, I, Texas Property Investments, and Lone Star Residential. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. When I stopped doing their laundry, claiming my back couldn't handle lifting heavy baskets, Jessica had to either do it herself or take it to a laundromat. When I reduced my cooking schedule from 7 nights a week to 3/8, citing fatigue, they were forced to order takeout or learn to cook. The breaking point came when I announced I couldn't continue picking Tyler up from school every day. "What do you mean you can't pick him up?" Michael demanded. "You don't have anything else to do." "Actually, I've been having some health issues, and I need to focus on taking care of myself," I said calmly. "Perhaps you could arrange for after-school care or adjust your work schedules." "After-school care costs money, Mom. I understand that. Would it help if I contributed to the cost?" Michael and Jessica exchanged glances. This was new territory. Me offering to pay for services rather than providing them myself. "How much could you contribute?" Jessica asked carefully. I was thinking I could cover the full cost. I've had some old investments doing well lately. Another strategic revelation. I watched as they processed this information, trying to reconcile their image of me as financially dependent with evidence that I had discretionary income. Within 2 weeks, they had enrolled Tyler in an after-school program that cost $800 per month. I paid the fee without blinking, transferred directly from one of my investment accounts. To them, it looked like generosity from someone with modest means. In reality, it was less than what I earned in passive income in 3 days. Margaret called me regularly to check on my progress. "How are they responding to the changes?" "They're confused," I admitted. "Jessica keeps asking where I'm getting money for new clothes and my car payments." "Car payments? I traded in the Honda for a certified pre-owned Lexus. Nothing too flashy, but definitely an upgrade. I told them I got a good deal on the trade-in." Margaret laughed. "You're a natural at this. What's your next move?" "The Morrison building sale closes next Friday. Michael will find out on Monday that his company has new ownership. I'm curious to see how long it takes him to realize who his new landlord is. And you're prepared for the confrontation that's coming." I thought about the voice message that had started this whole journey. Jessica's words still stung, but they no longer defined how I saw myself. I wasn't a leech or a burden. I was Dorothy Williams, and Dorothy Williams was nobody's fool. "I'm ready," I said. "It's time for my family to learn who they've been taking for granted." The first domino fell on a Monday morning in October. I was in the kitchen making Tyler's lunch when Michael's phone rang. Even from across the room, I could hear the panic in his boss's voice through the speaker. "Mike, we need to talk. Can you come in early today? There's been a development with the building ownership." Michael looked confused. "What kind of development? Dave, just come in early. We'll discuss it then." After Michael left, Jessica cornered me by the coffee maker. "Dorothy, where exactly are you getting money for all these new expenses? The after-school care, your new clothes, that car payment you mentioned." I had been preparing for this question for weeks. "Well, dear, after Robert died, there were some insurance policies and old investments I'd forgotten about. Nothing dramatic, but enough to give me a little independence." "How much independence are we talking about?" I pretended to consider the question carefully. "Enough that I don't feel like such a burden on you and Michael anymore. I know how difficult it's been having me here." Jessica's face flushed slightly. She'd been waiting for weeks to see if I'd mentioned the voice message, and my comment about being a burden was getting close to dangerous territory. "You're not a burden, Dorothy. We're family." "Of course we are," I said with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. By noon, Michael was calling from work, and he sounded shaken. "Mom, something weird is happening at the office. Our building was sold, and the new management company is making all kinds of changes. They want to inspect all the tenant spaces and review all the lease agreements." "Oh my, that sounds stressful." "The crazy thing is, nobody knows who actually bought the building. It's some LLC called Austin Holdings, and they're being really secretive about the ownership. Dave thinks it might be some big corporation planning to renovate and jack up all the rents." I made appropriate, sympathetic noises while internally celebrating. Margaret's LLC structure was working perfectly. Well, I'm sure it will all work out, honey. That afternoon, while Jessica was at work and Tyler was at his after-school program, I drove to East Austin to visit the house Robert had bought for me 25 years ago. The tenants had moved out the previous week, and I wanted to see my future home for the first time in decades. The house on Cedar Street was everything Robert had remembered about my dreams. A 1920s craftsman bungalow with the blue shutters I'd fallen in love with during our Sunday drives when we were newlyweds. The front porch had a swing. Immature oak trees shaded the entire front yard. It needed work, new paint, updated appliances, modern plumbing, but the bones were perfect. I spent an hour walking through rooms that would soon be mine again, imagining where I'd put Robert's desk, how I'd arrange the living room, what it would feel like to cook in my own kitchen without asking permission or apologizing for taking up space. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Dorothy, can you start dinner early tonight? I'm bringing my sister Karen over and I want to show her how well you've been taking care of us. Show her how well I'd been taking care of them, as if I were a service provider whose performance was being evaluated." I texted back, "Sorry, I have an appointment this evening. There's leftover soup in the fridge." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Jessica, and she was not happy. "Dorothy, what appointment? You didn't mention any appointment this morning. I'm meeting with a contractor about some work I need done." "What work? What contractor?" The questions were getting more pointed, more suspicious. Jessica was starting to realize that her compliant, grateful mother-in-law was becoming inconveniently independent. "Just some personal business, dear. I should be home by 8. I spent the evening with a contractor named Jim Russo, getting estimates for renovating the Cedar Street house. When I mentioned my budget was flexible, his demeanor changed noticeably. "Mrs. Pike Williams, for the kind of work you're describing, we're looking at probably $60,000 to $80,000. That's assuming we find no major structural issues." "That sounds reasonable. When could you start?" Jim blinked, clearly not expecting such a quick agreement. "Well, I could have my crew out there next week to begin the preliminary work." "Perfect. I'd like this finished as soon as possible." When I returned to Michael's house at 8:30, both he and Jessica were waiting in the living room like parents confronting a teenager who'd missed curfew. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said. "Jessica and I are concerned about these mysterious appointments and all this money you seem to have suddenly." I sat down calmly in the armchair across from them. "What would you like to know?" "Let's start with how much money we're actually talking about," Jessica said. "Because the Dorothy who moved in here 2 years ago was broke. She sold her house to pay our bills and had nothing left. Now suddenly you're paying for after-school care, buying new clothes, getting your own car payment, hiring contractors. Where is this money coming from?" It was time for phase 2 of Margaret's strategy. I pulled out my phone and showed them a screenshot of one of my investment account balances. Not the full amount, just enough to shock them. "Robert had some investments I didn't know about," I said simply. "His financial advisor contacted me a few months ago." Michael stared at the screen, his face going pale. The number showing was $47,000, a substantial sum, but not enough to support the lifestyle changes I'd been making. $47,000, Jessica said. That's a lot of money, Dorothy." "Oh, that's just one account," I said casually. Robert was apparently more financially savvy than I realized. The room fell silent. I could see them doing mental calculations, trying to reconcile their image of me as financially dependent with this new information. Finally, Michael spoke. "Mom, why didn't you tell us about this before?" "Well, to be honest, I wasn't sure how much was there or if I could access it, and you two have been so kind, letting me stay here, that I didn't want to seem ungrateful." Jessica's expression was shifting from suspicion to something that looked almost like fear. "When you say that's just one account, Robert had several different investments. His advisor is still helping me understand everything." I paused for effect. "But it looks like I'll be able to regain my independence sooner than expected." "Independence?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Well, yes. I've been looking at apartments, maybe a small house. I don't want to overstay my welcome here." The panic in Jessica's eyes was immediate and obvious. The woman who had called me a dead weight was suddenly confronted with the possibility that her free household labor was about to disappear and be replaced with actual expenses. "Mom, you don't need to rush into anything," Michael said quickly. "I mean, we've gotten used to having you here. Tyler loves having his grandmother around." "That's very sweet, but I think it's time I had my own space again." I stood up as if the conversation was over. "Don't worry, I'll give you plenty of notice before I move." I went to my room, leaving them to process this bombshell. Through the thin walls, I could hear them talking in hushed, urgent tones. Jessica's voice was getting higher with stress, and Michael kept saying, "I don't understand," over and over. The next morning brought the second domino. Michael came home from work looking shell-shocked. "The new building owners want to meet with all the tenants," he announced. "They're reviewing everyone's leases and talking about optimizing the property's revenue potential. Dave thinks they're going to double our rent." "Oh no," I said, adding just the right amount of concern to my voice. "What would that mean for your company?" "It would mean we'd have to find a new location, probably, which means I might lose my job if Dave decides to downsize rather than relocate." Jessica looked stricken. "Michael, we can't afford for you to lose your job. Not with the mortgage and Tyler's school expenses," and she trailed off, probably realizing she was about to mention their financial vulnerabilities in front of the woman they'd been treating as financially dependent. "I'm sure it will work out," I said soothingly. "These things usually do." That afternoon, I met Margaret for lunch at Hillside Pharmacy, a trendy restaurant in East Austin where we could speak freely. "Phase 2 is in motion," I reported. "They know I have money, but they don't know how much. Jessica is starting to panic about losing her free labor, and Michael is worried about his job." "Perfect timing," Margaret said. "The apartment complex purchase closes tomorrow. How do you want to handle the rent situation?" Michael and Jessica had been renting out their spare bedroom through Airbnb to help with their mortgage payments. They typically earned about $800 per month from short-term rentals, money that had become essential to their budget. "Let's start with stricter rental policies," I suggested. "Nothing dramatic, just enough to reduce their income and increase their stress. I can have the new management company implement a no short-term rentals policy," Margaret agreed. "Perfectly legal, and it will immediately cut off that revenue stream." The third domino fell the following week. Jessica stormed into the house waving an official-looking letter. "They're banning Airbnb," she announced. "The new owners of Riverside Gardens are implementing a policy against short-term rentals. We have to cancel all our upcoming bookings." Michael looked up from his laptop, where he'd been frantically searching for new office space. "How much were we making from that?" "About $800 a month. Money we really need right now, especially if you lose your job." I looked up from the book I was reading. "Well, maybe this is a sign that it's time for me to find my own place. That would free up the guest room for longer-term rentals. You could probably get $1,200 a month for a regular tenant." "No, Mom, that's not—" Michael started, then stopped. The math was obvious. They made more money from a regular tenant than from Airbnb, but they also needed my household labor more than they needed the extra income. "Besides," I continued, "I've been feeling like I'm in the way here. You're a young family and you need your space." "You're not in the way," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. The woman who had complained to her friends about me taking up space was now worried about losing the services I provided. Over the next 2 weeks, I escalated the psychological pressure. I hired a housekeeping service, not to replace my work, but in addition to it. When a team of professional cleaners showed up at the house, Jessica was mortified. "Dorothy, what is this?" I felt bad about not being able to keep up with the cleaning because of my back problems, I explained. "So I thought I'd hire some help. They'll come twice a week." "How much is this costing?" "Don't worry about it. It's my contribution to the household." The cleaning service cost $300 per week, money that demonstrated my growing financial confidence, while simultaneously highlighting how much unpaid labor I'd been providing. When Jessica saw how thoroughly and professionally the house was cleaned, she began to understand exactly how much work I'd been doing for free. I also hired a part-time nanny to pick Tyler up from his after-school program and help with his homework until Michael or Jessica got home. "This is getting expensive, Dorothy," Michael said after the first week of paid childcare. "It's fine, honey. I want to contribute while I'm here, and this gives me more time to focus on my health and my own affairs." The nanny cost $600 per week. Combined with the housekeeping service, I was paying $900 weekly for services I had previously provided for free. The message was clear. Dorothy's unpaid labor had been worth nearly $4,000 per month, and now they were seeing exactly what it cost to replace. The fourth domino was the most devastating. 3 weeks after the Morrison building sale, Michael came home looking destroyed. "They fired Dave," he announced. "The new owners are bringing in their own management team. I might have a job for another month." "But then, oh, sweetheart," I said, genuinely sympathetic despite everything. "What will you do?" "I don't know. The job market is terrible right now, and without Dave as a reference..." He slumped into a chair. "This is a disaster." Jessica was pacing the living room like a caged animal. "We can't afford the mortgage without your salary, Michael. And now we don't have the Airbnb income either. We're completely screwed." It was time for phase 3. I sat down across from them, projecting calm confidence in contrast to their panic. "I might be able to help," I said quietly. They both turned to look at me with desperate hope. "How?" Jessica asked. "Well, I've been talking to my financial advisor, and it turns out Robert's investments are worth more than I initially thought. Quite a bit more." I pulled out my phone and showed them a different account balance, this one showing $847,000. Michael's eyes widened. "Mom, that's almost $1 million. Robert was apparently very good at picking investments," I said. "My advisor thinks the total value of everything might be over $2 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them recalculating everything they thought they knew about me, their situation, and the power dynamics in their household. $2 million. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper, possibly more. "We're still uncovering accounts." I put my phone away. "The point is, I'm in a position to help if you need it. I could cover your mortgage for a while, or help with other expenses while Michael looks for a new job." "You would do that?" Michael asked. And for a moment I heard the boy I'd raised, scared and looking to his mother for security. "Of course I would. We're family." Jessica stood up abruptly. "I need some air," she said, and walked out onto the back patio. Michael followed her, and through the glass doors, I could see them having an intense conversation. Jessica was gesturing wildly, probably trying to process the revelation that the woman she'd been treating as a burden was actually worth more than they could earn in 20 years. When they came back inside, their entire demeanor had changed. Jessica, who hadn't made eye contact with me in weeks, was suddenly solicitous. "Dorothy, can I get you some tea? You look tired." "Thank you, dear. That would be lovely." Michael sat down next to me. "Mom, I need to apologize. Jessica and I have been so stressed about money that we probably haven't been as appreciative as we should have been." "Appreciative of everything you do for us. The cooking, the cleaning, taking care of Tyler. We've been taking it for granted." I looked at him with what I hoped was gentle confusion. "Have you?" I hadn't noticed. The lie hung in the air between us. We all knew I had noticed. We all knew they had been taking me for granted, but now that they understood I had options, financial power that could either save them or abandon them to their fate, suddenly their perspective was shifting. "Maybe we should talk about arrangements," Jessica said carefully. "If you're going to be helping us financially, perhaps we should formalize things. Make sure you're comfortable here." "What do you mean?" "Well, maybe you'd like the master bedroom. It has the better bathroom and more closet space. Michael and I could move into the guest room." The offer was stunning in its transparency. The woman who had grudgingly allowed me to sleep in her guest room was now offering to give me the best room in the house. The shift in power couldn't have been more obvious. "That's very generous," I said, "but I'm comfortable where I am. For now," I thought, because soon I'd be comfortable in my own house, on my own terms, with my own rules, but they didn't need to know that yet. The psychological transformation was remarkable to watch. Over the next week, as Michael grew more desperate about his job situation, and Jessica realized how much their household expenses would increase without my free labor, they began treating me with a deference that bordered on the absurd. Jessica started asking my opinion about dinner plans. Michael consulted me about his job search strategy. They both began including me in conversations instead of talking around me. Most tellingly, They stopped leaving their personal messes for me to clean up. Jessica started making her own bed and putting her dishes in the dishwasher. Michael began doing his own laundry. The voice message that had started this whole journey seemed like it had come from a different lifetime. The woman who had called me a leech was now desperately trying to make sure I felt valued and appreciated. But it was too little, too late. They weren't treating me better because they'd learned to respect me. They were treating me better because they'd learned to fear losing me. And that, I realized, was a lesson worth teaching. The final confrontation came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Exactly 3 months after I'd heard Jessica's voice message. Michael had been officially laid off that morning, and the atmosphere in the house was thick with desperation and barely contained panic. I was in the kitchen preparing what I knew would be my last dinner in their home when Jessica approached me with an envelope in her hands. "Dorothy, Michael and I have been talking, and we have a proposal for you." I continued stirring the pasta sauce, not looking up. "What kind of proposal, dear?" "Well, since you're in such a good financial position now, and since we're family, we were thinking you might want to invest in our future." "Invest how?" Jessica sat down at the kitchen table, spreading out papers from the envelope. "We found a house, a bigger house, in Westlake, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a beautiful kitchen, perfect for a multi-generational family." I turned from the stove to look at the real estate listings she'd laid out. The house was stunning and expensive. The asking price was $1.2 million. "It's lovely," I said carefully. "But that's quite a lot of money." "That's where the investment part comes in," Michael said, entering the kitchen with Tyler trailing behind him. "If you put down the money for the house, we'd all live there together. You'd have the master suite, your own space, but we'd still be family. And when the house appreciates, we'd split the profits." I looked at the 3 of them, Michael nervous but hopeful, Jessica trying to hide her desperation behind enthusiasm, and Tyler confused by the adult tension he could sense but not understand. "Split the profits how?" I asked. "Well, since you'd be making the down payment, maybe 60-40. Jessica suggested. "You'd get the larger share, obviously." I set down my wooden spoon and really looked at them for the first time in months. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want me to buy you $1 million house where you would live for free, and in exchange, I would get 60% of any future profits when we sell. When you put it like that, it sounds..." Michael started. "Honest?" I suggested. "Because that's exactly what you're proposing." The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling of the pasta water. Tyler looked between the adults, sensing something important was happening, but not understanding what. "Dorothy," Jessica said carefully, "we're not trying to take advantage of you. We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. A solution that works for everyone." I repeated her words slowly, tasting their absurdity. "Tell me, Jessica, what solution were you looking for 3 months ago when you sent that voice message to your friends?" Jessica's face went white. Michael looked confused, but Tyler was still standing there, and I realized this conversation had gone as far as it could with my grandson present. "Tyler, sweetheart, why don't you go start your homework? We'll call you when dinner's ready." After Tyler left, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. With deliberate movements, I navigated to the WhatsApp family group and played Jessica's voice message on speaker. "That old woman is a dead weight in my house. I can't stand having this leech eating our food and taking up our space anymore. If Mike didn't feel sorry for her, I would have kicked her out months ago." Jessica's own voice filled the kitchen, each cruel word hanging in the air like a physical presence. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, horror, and finally shame. "Mom, I never heard this message," he said quietly. "I know you didn't," I replied. Jessica deleted it from the group chat within minutes of sending it, but I heard it. Every word. Jessica was crying now, but I felt no satisfaction in her tears, only a deep, bone-tired sadness for what our family had become. "That was 3 months ago," I continued. 3 months of watching you both panic about money while I sat on nearly $3 million in assets. 3 months of watching you scramble to replace the dead weight who had been cooking your meals, cleaning your house, and raising your child. $3 million, Michael's voice cracked. "Mom, you said $2 million. I said Robert's investments might be worth over $2 million. I was being conservative. I pulled out a different phone, the one Margaret had given me for business purposes, and showed them a comprehensive account summary. The actual number is $2.8 million in liquid assets, plus properties worth approximately $1.2 million. The silence stretched on until Jessica finally found her voice. "Dorothy, I'm so sorry. That message, I was having a bad day, and I said things I didn't mean." "Oh, but you did mean them," I said gently. "And that's the problem. When you thought I was powerless, you treated me like hired help. When you realized I had money, suddenly I became family worth investing in. The only thing that changed was your perception of my financial situation." Michael slumped into a chair. "What do you want from us, Mom?" "I want you to understand something very important," I said, turning off the stove and facing them both. "For the past 3 months, I've been paying for services to replace the work I was doing for free. The housekeeping, the childcare, the cooking assistance. Do you know what that's cost me?" They shook their heads. $3,600 per month. That's what my labor was worth to your household. $43,000 per year in unpaid services provided by the woman you called a leech." Jessica was sobbing openly now. "Please, Dorothy, we can do better. We can treat you better." "I know you can," I said. "But not here, not in this dynamic, not with this history between us." I walked to the kitchen counter where I'd left a folder Margaret had prepared for me. Inside were the keys to the Cedar Street house and a letter explaining everything. "I'm moving out this weekend," I announced. "I've bought a house in East Austin. Actually, it's a house Robert bought for me 25 years ago that I've been renting out without knowing it. It's being renovated now, and it will be ready by Sunday." "Mom, please don't do this," Michael pleaded. "We can work this out." "We can work it out," I agreed. "But not while you think of me as either a burden or a bank account. You need to learn to value people for who they are, not what they can do for you." I looked at both of them. My son, who had allowed his wife to treat his mother like hired help, and my daughter-in-law, who had mistaken generosity for weakness. "I love you both," I said finally, "and I love Tyler. But love isn't enough when there's no respect. You're going to have to earn that back." 6 months later, I was sitting on the front porch swing of my Cedar Street house, watching the sun set through the oak trees, while Tyler helped me plant tomatoes in the garden. It was a Saturday afternoon in May, and the Texas heat was just beginning to hint at the scorching summer to come. "Grandma Dorothy, why do the tomato plants need so much water?" Tyler asked, carefully pouring water from his small watering can onto the seedlings we'd just planted. "Because they're growing, sweetheart. Growing things need lots of care and attention to become strong." It was a lesson I'd learned myself over the past months. Moving into my own home had been like replanting myself in better soil. The house Robert had chosen for me was perfect, large enough to entertain, but cozy enough to feel intimate, with a kitchen that made me want to cook again, and a garden that gave me peace. Margaret had helped me structure my finances so that I'd never have to worry about money again. But more importantly, she'd helped me understand my own worth. The Dorothy who had allowed herself to be treated like hired help was gone, replaced by a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she would and wouldn't accept from others. "When are Mommy and Daddy coming to pick me up?" Tyler asked. "In about an hour. Are you excited to show them your tomato plants?" Tyler nodded enthusiastically. This was his 3rd weekend visit since I'd moved out, and each time, the arrangement worked a little better. Michael and Jessica picked him up on Friday afternoons and brought him back on Sunday evenings. Sometimes they stayed for dinner, sometimes they didn't. The choice was always mine. The reconciliation had been slow and deliberate. For the first month after I moved out, we'd barely spoken except about Tyler's schedule. Michael had eventually found a new job, ironically, with a property management company that specialized in managing buildings owned by LLCs. He never learned that some of those buildings belonged to his mother. Jessica had been forced to confront the reality of managing a household without free labor. She'd hired a housekeeper, but only once a week, and she'd had to learn to cook meals and manage Tyler's schedule herself. It had been a humbling experience that, according to Tyler's innocent reports, had involved a lot of crying and several burned dinners. The first real conversation we'd had came when Jessica called me in tears. 3 weeks after I'd moved out. "Dorothy, "I don't know how you did it all," she'd said. "The cooking, the cleaning, the scheduling. I'm exhausted, and I'm only managing half of what you used to do." "It takes practice," I'd said simply, "and appreciation for the work helps. I never appreciated it. I never appreciated you. I'm so sorry." That conversation had been the beginning of something new between us. Not the old dynamic where I was the grateful dependent, but not the hostile standoff of those first weeks either. Something more honest, more equal. Michael had taken longer to come around. His male ego had been bruised by discovering that his financially dependent mother was actually wealthier than he could ever hope to be. But gradually, as he'd struggled with his job loss and learned to manage his own household, he'd begun to understand what I'd been doing for them all those years. The breakthrough had come when Tyler asked me, in front of his parents, why I didn't live with them anymore. "Because sometimes adults need their own space to be happy," I'd explained. "And sometimes families need to learn how to treat each other better." Tyler had nodded solemnly and then asked, "Are you happier now, Grandma?" "Much happier, sweetheart." Michael had looked around my beautiful, peaceful home and seen the truth of that statement. I was happier. I was healthier. I was living on my own terms for the first time in 2 years. Now, as Tyler and I finished watering the garden, I heard a car pulling into my driveway. Michael and Jessica emerged, looking more relaxed than I'd seen them in months. Michael had lost some weight, and Jessica had started wearing her hair down instead of in the tight ponytail that had become her stress uniform. "Hi, Mom," Michael said, giving me a genuine hug. "How was your weekend with this guy?" "Perfect, as always. We planted tomatoes, made pancakes, and built a fort in the living room." Jessica smiled, a real smile, not the forced politeness of our early interactions. "Tyler's been talking about those pancakes all week. Maybe you could teach me the recipe sometime?" "I'd be happy to," I said, and meant it. As they gathered Tyler's belongings and prepared to leave, Jessica lingered on the porch. "Dorothy, thank you," she said quietly, "for the lesson. I needed to learn it. We all needed to learn it," I replied. "But we're family. We figure it out together." After they left, I sat back down on my porch swing and looked out at the garden Tyler and I had planted. The tomato seedlings were small now, fragile and uncertain. But with proper care, attention, and respect for what they needed to grow, they would become something strong and nourishing. Just like family relationships, I thought. Just like second chances. Just like the life I'd built for myself, one choice at a time. Dorothy Williams was home.